Hey friends, tonight we're not just visiting ancient Egypt, we're clocking in. That's right. Today, you are a pyramid builder. Not a pharaoh, not a priest, just one dusty human trying to survive the world's most intense construction job. Sure, pyramids look majestic from a distance, but up close? It's all heat stroke. Sand in places sand should never be, and the constant threat of being crushed by a 1,000-year-old block. So before we start lifting imaginary limestone, take a second to like the video and subscribe, only if you enjoy smart pain and ancient misery with a side of humor. Let me know in the comments, what's the hottest job you've ever had, and how did it break you? Now, grab some water, stretch out your back, and maybe light a candle, for historical ambience, of course. Time to see if you'd last a single shift under Ra's merciless spotlight. The sun's not just rising, it's launching a full-blown assault. You wake up on what's technically a bed, a scratchy straw mat that's done absolutely nothing to stop the sand from forming a permanent relationship with your skin. Your linen sheet? More suggestion than substance. It clings to you like warm, damp parchment. The air is already thick, unmoving. And no, there's no breeze. The Nile's famous morning wind must have taken the day off. Again. You blink slowly, hoping it's still early. Spoiler, it's not. The sun has already barged in, cutting through your reed roof like Ra himself kicking down your door. There are no curtains, no shades, no concept of sleeping in, just heat. Relentless, prehistoric, no boundaries heat. You don't even need to move. Your body is already sweating like it's being interrogated by the gods. Somewhere outside, a rooster half-heartedly crows. It sounds tired. Same, buddy. You sit up and instantly regret it. Your back cracks, your knees protest, and your hair is stuck to your forehead like nature's version of duct tape. You're not sick, you're just alive, in ancient Egypt. Your feet hit the ground and immediately remember they hate the ground. It's not just dirt, it's preheated clay, seasoned with loose pebbles and mystery grit. Shoes? Please. If you're lucky, you've got a worn pair of reed sandals that do about as much for protection as a napkin in a thunderstorm. You shuffle toward the doorway of your mud brick home, which is less a house and more a sun-baked oven someone accidentally sleeps in. You peek outside. The light is already blinding. Shadows are short. Air is still. And it's not even mid-morning. Every inch of you is sticky, tired, and bracing for another day of hauling, hammering, or heaving multi-ton stones for a monument you'll never be buried in. You haven't even started working yet, and the day is already yelling at you. Your only relief? Maybe a splash of Nile water to the face, assuming the crocodiles are feeling generous this morning. But here's the real kicker. This is normal. There are no weekends, no fans, no iced coffee waiting for you. Just heat, sweat, sand, and expectations. You wake up already behind. And if you're not moving, you're falling behind faster. So take a deep breath, well as deep as the hot, dusty air will allow. Because day one on the pyramid site hasn't even started, and you're already half-cooked. You might think the worst part of pyramid life is hauling giant stones under the sun. And sure, that's brutal. But let's rewind to a few hours earlier, to the part where you tried to sleep. Nighttime in ancient Egypt isn't peaceful. It's survival on hard mode. First of all, there's no bed. Not in the way you know it. No mattress, no pillow, no blanket. Just a bundle of straw pretending to be comfortable, laid on a packed dirt floor that remembers every footprint and holds on to heat like it's collecting a grudge. Your straw mat crinkles every time you shift, which you do often, because your back refuses to forgive you. Your sheet is a thin piece of linen, woven by someone who clearly hated comfort. It's too light to offer warmth, too rough to be soft, and too small to cover all of you. But it does do one thing very well. Trap sweat. You spend half the night peeling it off your body like a wet napkin. The air is still, dense, and hot. Not summer in the city, hot. This is desert night baking the marrow out of your bones, hot. You'd think it cools off after sundown. It doesn't. The walls of your mud brick hut, having baked in sunlight all day, now radiate stored-up heat directly into your dreams. It's like sleeping inside a freshly used pizza oven. And the bugs? Oh, the bugs. Flies don't sleep. Mosquitoes are hyperactive. Gnats form swarms with better coordination than your construction team. They don't just buzz near your face. They land, bite, and act like they've paid rent. You try to cover your head with your arm, but that just traps more heat. You swat blindly and curse under your breath, hoping not to wake the rest of your family, who are also trying to sleep 5 across the same small space. One kid's foot is on your neck. Someone else's elbow is in your ribs. It's not just the heat or the insects or the hard floor. It's the awareness that tomorrow's coming, fast. And tomorrow means lifting, dragging, enduring, again. Sleep becomes a negotiation. How much discomfort can you ignore long enough to pass out? Eventually, you drift off. Not because you're comfortable, but because exhaustion wins. It's a mercy, really. But don't get too cozy. Roosters are impatient, and your overseer doesn't care if you only got 2 hours of half-conscious sweating. The sun is rising. Again, and so are you. Sleep, in ancient Egypt, isn't rest. It's a short truce with misery. The good news? You've survived the night. The bad news? Now you need to clean yourself. And in ancient Egypt, clean is a loose concept. You shuffle your way toward the Nile. It's not far, but under the rising sun, even a short walk feels like a pilgrimage. The dirt path is already warming beneath your feet. You carry a small jar, maybe 2, balanced awkwardly because you've had 0 core training and slept like a pretzel. Then you smell it. Before you see the Nile, you smell the Nile. It's complex, a blend of damp algae, fish guts, animal waste, and something that may or may not be decomposing upstream. People call it sacred. And sure, it's sacred. It also smells like a fish market going through an emotional crisis. Still, this is your bath, and your sink, and your laundry room. You crouch near the edge, always watching, always listening, because crocodiles aren't a joke. They've been around longer than pyramids, and they don't care if you're poor, tired, or not emotionally ready to be lunch. You splash a little water on your face. It's lukewarm, somehow sticky. You rub it in anyway. There's no soap, not unless you're rich or work in a temple. What you do have is sand. And by have, I mean you can pick it up anywhere, because it's everywhere. So you exfoliate, gently, or not so gently. Egyptian skincare is basically sandpaper meets optimism. It scrapes off some sweat, some regret, and maybe a layer of skin. Congratulations, you're now technically cleaner. Other people are here too. A woman is washing her child. A man is rinsing clothes by slapping them against a rock. A herd of goats strolls by like they own the place. There is no privacy. The Nile is everybody's everything. If you're modest, this is not your era. You fill your jar and pray it doesn't spill on the way back. Your arms are already sore. Your back is still mad. And you haven't even eaten. Oh, and let's not forget what's in that water. Bacteria, parasites, the runoff from people upstream using the river as a toilet, and sometimes a grave. But it's all you've got. You can't afford to be picky. You step back from the edge, still in one piece. No croc bites, no dysentery. Yet. This is the first win of your day. Small victories matter. Clean, well, less dirty. You head back home. Time for the most anticipated part of the day, breakfast. Not because it's delicious, but because it's the only thing standing between you and collapsing before noon. Let's set expectations low. No avocado toast, no cold brew, no eggs cooked to your preference. Breakfast in ancient Egypt is less about pleasure and more about survival logistics. Think of it as tactical refueling. You squat on the ground or, if you're lucky, perch on a low stool that wobbles like it's considering early retirement. In front of you, the centerpiece of your morning, bread, lots of it. And by bread, we mean something that looks like a brick and chews like a sandal. It's made from emmer wheat or barley, coarsely ground between stone slabs that also generously donate a few grains of actual stone into the mix. So yes, every bite comes with a satisfying crunch, not from crust, from sand. It's the kind of bread that files your teeth as you eat it. Ancient dental remains show Egyptians had flat, worn-down molars by their 20s. Now you understand why. You're not just eating breakfast, you're sanding your mouth from the inside. Next up, the drink. Don't get excited. It's beer, but not the weekend kind. This is warm, thick, and cloudy. It tastes like someone forgot to finish brewing their cereal. Liquid bread, more porridge than pint. And yes, even kids drink it, not to be rebellious, but because water is basically roulette with dysentery. The beer is loaded with calories, vaguely fermented, and may or may not still be fermenting in your cup. It's not refreshing, it's functional, like drinking soggy oatmeal someone dared to call nutritious. If the gods smile on you today, there might be a slice of onion or a few shriveled dates to go with your crunchy loaf and barley sludge. Protein? Only if someone caught a fish and didn't immediately eat it raw. And then there are the flies. So many flies. They orbit your food like tiny, buzzing priests performing some sacred ritual of annoyance. You swat them away with one hand while holding your beer with the other. And you try, not entirely successfully, not to eat one. This meal? It's not gourmet, but it gives you just enough energy to survive the next few hours of sun, sweat, and stones. Bon appetit. You've earned it. Kind of. You've eaten your sand-infused bread. You've choked down your warm, grainy beer. You've swatted half a village's worth of flies. Now it's time to work. And by work, I mean subject yourself to a daily endurance trial designed by sun gods with a dark sense of humor. Unless you're a priest, scribe, or member of a very lucky bloodline, which, spoiler, you're not. You're heading to the pyramid site. It's not going to the office. It's marching into a furnace, carrying tools that haven't evolved since the invention of sticks. The sun is already climbing, and it's not just hot, it's personal. It radiates off the sand, the stones, your co-workers, even your own skin like you're standing in a giant open-air kiln. You can feel your eyebrows sweating. Your sweat is sweating. You join a line of other workers, men, women, older kids, all moving like a very tired caterpillar toward the base of a monument you'll never step foot inside. The scale is insane. Blocks of limestone the size of ox carts are being hauled into place by people with nothing but rope, wood sledges, and the blind hope that no one trips. Your job today? Haul, push, pull, dig, repeat. You might be dragging sledges, mixing mortar with your hands, or chipping away at rock with tools barely sharper than your attitude. There's no music, no morning briefing, just the occasional scream from the overseer, a man whose full-time role is to yell things like, "Faster!" and "You call that hauling?" while holding a stick that isn't just for decoration. Rest breaks? Minimal. Shade? Non-existent. Water? If you're lucky, there's a shared jug passed down the line, warm as soup and half full of grit. You take a sip anyway, because heatstroke is real, and nobody's handing out electrolytes. You try not to look at the pyramid. It's massive, beautiful, and demoralizing. Every stone laid is a reminder that your job isn't even halfway done, and when one of those stones rolls the wrong way, that's not just a setback, that's a possible funeral. Your hands are raw, your back aches, you squint at the sky, but Ra just glares back, smug and unrelenting. There's no clock-out time here. The sun decides when you're done, and it's in no hurry. You don't complain. Not out loud. Complaining means trouble. Sometimes a beating. Sometimes worse. So you just keep moving, praying that today your rope doesn't snap, your foot doesn't slip, and your luck doesn't run out. This isn't a job. It's penance disguised as construction. And the day has barely begun. There's lifting, and then there's ancient pyramid lifting. You're not carrying a box, a bag, or even a fellow worker who passed out in the heat. You're helping move blocks of stone that weigh as much as small cars, with no forklift, no pulley, just rope, leverage, sunstroke, and the kind of teamwork that comes from shared suffering. The limestone blocks don't care about your back pain. They don't care that your hands are blistered or that your sandals fell apart 4 hours ago. These stones are ancient, heavy, and completely indifferent to your feelings. You take your place at the rope. It's coarse, frayed, and rougher than your life choices. Your task? Pull. And pull. And then pull harder. The sled under the block creaks and groans like it's reconsidering its entire existence. And honestly, so are you. Your feet dig into the sand. Not the soft, beachy kind. This is gritty, sun-baked sand that shifts under your weight and stings your ankles like it has a grudge. You try to get traction, but it's like wrestling a mountain while standing on marbles. You lean back and pull with your whole body. Your arms scream. Your back howls. Your legs threaten mutiny. Sweat drips off you like you're leaking. And the stone? It moves 2 centimeters. Victory. Someone shouts. The overseer again, his voice sharp like a whip with vocal cords. Faster, he barks, as if sheer motivation can override the laws of physics. You grunt. Someone slips. Everyone sways. The stone shifts. For one terrifying moment, you think it's going to roll. You brace yourself. It doesn't. You live. This is your day. Hour after hour of dragging tons of ancient ambition across wooden planks coated in mud, water, or sometimes milk. Yes, they used milk to reduce friction. And you're still barefoot. The injuries pile up. Rope burn, strained joints, mystery bruises. One guy dislocates a shoulder. He gets pulled aside, patched up with linen and hope, and is told to walk it off. You wonder how many workers have just disappeared under a block, probably more than they tell you. The pyramid won't remember your name, but it might remember your bones. Still, you keep going, because if you stop, you get replaced, and no one wants to be the one who dropped the king's legacy. So you grip the rope tighter, ignore the pain, block out the sun, and pull, because this is what it means to build eternity, with bare hands and no exit plan. You think you know what hot feels like, until your feet introduce you to pyramid heat. Here's the thing about working under the Egyptian sun. It's not just beating down from above. It's also radiating up from every surface around you. The rocks, the sand, the very air, all weaponized by Ra himself into one continuous oven. Let's start with the ground. There's no pavement, no cool grass, just sun-baked earth that's been absorbing heat since sunrise. It's so hot, it feels like someone ironed it flat and forgot to unplug the planet. Every step is a negotiation between pain and progress. You tell yourself it's not that bad, and then you step on a sharp pebble and question all your life choices. Most workers go barefoot, not because they're brave, but because sandals wear out fast. Reed doesn't stand a chance against the gravel paths, splintered wood ramps, and chunks of stone debris scattered everywhere like ancient ankle traps. If you do have sandals, they're little more than loosely tied promises, thin, fraying, and useless once wet or warped. Your soles, after just a few weeks on site, look like cracked leather, blisters bloom, cuts reopen, dirt gets in. You try to ignore it. You have to ignore it. Because if you stop to nurse a wound, someone else will step over you and keep moving. The pyramid won't wait. Now let's talk about the stones. They're everywhere. Giant blocks sitting in the sun like heat batteries. If you lean against one to rest, congratulations, you've just seared your shoulder. Some of the smaller stones are so hot you can't touch them bare-handed without feeling like you just grabbed a stovetop. You try to find shade. There is none. Maybe a sliver behind a tool cart or under the edge of a half-built ramp. But that shade is shared real estate, and there's already a guy napping there with his foot in a water jar and no intention of moving. You wipe sweat from your brow, and it instantly returns. Your tunic is soaked. Dust clings to your damp skin like seasoning. Your arms are sunburned. Your nose is peeling. Even your eyelids feel sun-dried. And the worst part? It's not even noon. The day stretches ahead like a shimmering, heat-warped hallucination. And you still have to haul, lift, dodge, and sweat your way through it, barefoot, blistered, and praying you don't step on something ancient and sharp. Welcome to the real desert experience. No mirages, just molten rocks and a foot massage from hell. Mistakes happen. That's just life, right? Well, not here. In ancient Egypt, one wrong move doesn't just get you yelled at, it might get you cursed. Or worse, remembered forever, as the idiot who offended the gods and possibly doomed an entire tomb. You're stacking blocks. You've got sweat in your eyes, dust in your lungs, and a sunburn on your soul. Your brain is fried. Your hands are shaking. Then it happens. Your chisel slips. A line cracks. A symbol is misshaped. And just like that, you've messed up a wall meant to last for eternity. You freeze. No one speaks. The scribe overseeing the design looks at you like you just sneezed on the pharaoh's dinner. You glance around. Is there any way to undo it? Smooth it out? Pretend it didn't happen? Nope. The damage is done. And here's the problem. This isn't just a carving. It's sacred. Every symbol, Every line, every brush of pigment is meant to guide the soul of a royal person into the afterlife. So when you mess up, it's not just sloppy craftsmanship, it's spiritual sabotage. Best case scenario? They make you redo it while 5 people watch and whisper about your doomed soul. Worst case? They think you've disrespected the gods, or worse, deliberately invited chaos. Because in this world, chaos isn't just a concept, it's a literal god, and no one wants him showing up for work. You've heard stories. Workers who dropped sacred amulets and weren't seen again. A guy who accidentally scuffed a statue and later fell off a scaffold. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was divine justice. Maybe it was the foreman handling things, quietly. And don't forget the curses. Temples and tombs are covered in warnings. Disturb this place, and may your tongue rot. Steal from here, and may a crocodile feast on your shadow. Even if you don't believe in that stuff, everyone else does. So now you're that guy. The one people won't sit next to at lunch. The one they side-eye during rituals. The one the priest mumbles extra prayers for. You start carrying a lucky charm. You apologize to statues when you walk past. You give your portion of dates to the nearest altar, just in case. Because no one wants to be cursed. Not in this heat. Not in this life. Not when the afterlife is still watching. One slip of the hand. One botched symbol. That's all it takes. Here, mistakes don't fade. They echo. By some miracle, or maybe just muscle memory, you've survived the morning. Your arms are shaking. Your back is plotting revenge. Your feet have evolved into heat-resistant hooves. But you're still standing. And now, it's lunchtime. Not that anyone blows a horn or calls a break. You just stop when your body stops cooperating. You find a scrap of shade, if you're lucky. Maybe behind a half-built wall. Maybe beside a stack of stones that hasn't collapsed yet. It's not really cool there, but it's slightly less like standing inside a bread oven. You sit, or rather, you fold yourself into a squat. There are no picnic blankets, no benches, just the ground. Hot, cracked, and decorated with yesterday's footprints and today's fresh sweat stains. Your meal is familiar. More bread. Because of course, it's still dense, still gritty, still contains enough sand to qualify as an exfoliating treatment. You tear off a piece and start chewing, and chewing, and chewing. By the third bite, your jaw feels like it's lifting stone blocks of its own. There's beer too, if you remembered to bring some. It's still warm, still cloudy, still tastes like someone tried to make porridge and gave up halfway. But it has calories, and that's the only metric that matters right now. Flies arrive before you do. They hover, land, wander across your bread like they own it. You wave your hand lazily, they leave, and come back. They always come back. Some people talk while eating. Others just stare into the distance, chewing slowly, eyes glazed with exhaustion and dust. No one's in a hurry. Not because they're relaxed, but because speed requires energy, and you have none left to spare. Occasionally someone shares an onion, or a date, or, on a festival day, a small dried fish that tastes like salty leather. You nod in gratitude, chew it slowly, and try not to think about what part of the fish it was. You lean against the wall. It's cracked and hot to the touch, but stable enough. For now, you close your eyes. Let your head rest for just a second. A shout cuts through the air. Breaks over. You swallow the last of your bread dust combo. Stand up slowly. Your knees creak like old doors. Your hands are sticky. Your stomach is satisfied-ish. Lunchtime in ancient Egypt isn't relaxing. It's survival in slow motion. But it gets you just enough strength to go back out there and keep pretending this pyramid is building itself. If you think life was hard for a male laborer in ancient Egypt, try being a woman. Seriously. Try waking up before sunrise, not to meditate, not to sip tea on a balcony, but to grind grain by hand while your toddler uses your leg as a napkin. Let's be clear. Ancient Egyptian women had more rights than many women in later civilizations. They could own land, file for divorce, even take men to court. But rights on paper didn't mean rest in real life. Because while the men were dragging stones under the sun, the women were managing everything else. You start your day by hauling water from the Nile. The jug is heavy, your back already hurts. And yes, there are flies, frogs, and the occasional goose with attitude. You carry the jar on your head, because posture is power, and hope your sandals don't fall apart halfway home. Then it's time to make bread. But not the kind with yeast and love. No, this bread starts with crushing grain using a flat stone and pure elbow grease. The grain fights back. The stone eats your fingerprints. And somewhere in the mix, a generous helping of sand joins the dough, as always. While the bread bakes in a clay oven that also functions as an accidental space heater, you tend to your kids, who are sticky, shirtless, and somehow always covered in dirt, even when they just woke up. You weave linen, you patch tunics, you sweep the floor, which is 40% actual sand and 60% future sand, and if you're lucky, you get 5 minutes to sit before someone spills something, breaks something, or bleats for more goat milk. But you're not done, because in many households, especially poorer ones, you also help in the fields. Yes, after the housework. You join your husband, brother, or neighbour to plant barley, gather flax, or carry baskets of mud brick. The sun doesn't care about your multitasking, and when you come back, you cook dinner, clean up, soothe the baby, and maybe, lie down on your straw mat while hoping the baby doesn't pee on your foot again. Self-care? That's called not passing out. Me time? That's the 30 seconds between the last chore and total exhaustion. But through all that, you still show up. You smile. You sing lullabies. You paint your eyes with black coal not just for beauty, but to reduce glare and ward off infection. You wear your linen dress like armor, swat flies like a warrior, and carry your household like a queen no one carved into stone. Because in ancient Egypt, the men built pyramids, but the women kept the entire civilization standing. Some enemies you can see coming, wild animals, overseers with sticks, the sun, and then there's sand. You don't fight it, you live with it, whether you want to or not. Because in ancient Egypt, sand isn't just around you, it's in you. It's your environment, your seasoning, your skincare routine, and your mortal enemy. It's in your bed. Your mat might look clean, but one shift and crunch, there it is. In your blanket, in your tunic, between your toes, behind your ears, somehow even inside your eyelids. You blink, and it grinds like pepper in a mortar. It's in your food. Every loaf of bread comes with a surprise crunch. That's not crust. That's the finely ground stone dust that hitchhiked from your flour mill straight to your molars. Ancient Egyptian dentists didn't really exist, which is why archaeologists keep finding skeletons with teeth worn flat like river stones. It's in your drink. Your beer is thick, cloudy, and fermented, but also a little textured. No one talks about it. You just chew, swallow, move on. Your clothes? Made of linen, light, breathable, and absolutely useless at keeping sand out. It slips down your collar, sticks to your sweat, finds folds you didn't know your body had, and settles in. Your tunic becomes a portable sand trap. No matter how often you shake it out, the sand shakes back. Try walking barefoot, and your soles will collect a souvenir layer with every step. Try wearing sandals, and the sand slips under the straps anyway, laughing at your attempt to draw boundaries. Your feet slowly turn into leather, your heels split, and no cream will ever reach you in time. And then there are sandstorms. One moment, you're adjusting a rope or talking to a neighbor. The next, the sky turns beige, wind howls, vision drops to zero, and the sand hits like nature's exfoliating slap. You shut your eyes, wrap your head, and pray the gods aren't using this moment to test your spiritual grit. Even after the storm passes, you're coughing up the Sahara for 2 days. You sweep your floor, sand comes back. You cover your jar, sand gets in. You wash your face, the Nile gives you water, and more sand. It's relentless. It's intimate. It's not just part of your surroundings, it's part of your routine, your diet, your wardrobe, and your afterlife plans. You'll probably be buried with sand, possibly even made of it. In ancient Egypt, you don't fight sand, you surrender, quietly, grittily, forever. In ancient Egypt, religion isn't something you practice, it's something you breathe. It's in your meals, your chores, your haircut, your headaches, and, most inconveniently, your thoughts. Because here, gods aren't just above you, they're watching you, all of them, All the time. Ra sees you when you're cursing the heat. Anubis hears you when you mutter complaints while digging a tomb. Thoth probably has a scroll somewhere with every sarcastic thought you've ever had during a ritual. Even thinking the wrong thing could feel risky. You wake up? First, thank Ra for dragging the sun back across the sky. You spill your beer? Apologize to Hathor. You trip over a stone? Try not to curse out loud. Because the wind might carry your grumble to a deity with a short temper. Before you eat, you leave an offering. Before you sleep, you whisper a prayer. Before going to work, you nod at a passing ibis because, who knows, it might be Thoth in disguise doing a casual field check. This isn't overkill, it's survival. Because religion here isn't just about pleasing gods, it's about maintaining order. A divine balance called ma'at, truth, justice, harmony, and everyone staying in their lane. If one person messes up, the whole system can collapse, and nobody wants to be that guy. So you internalize it. You say what you're supposed to say. You think what you're supposed to think. Even your afterlife depends on it. Yes, afterlife. Because death in Egypt is basically one long bureaucratic audit. You'll stand before 42 gods, declare you didn't steal bread, cheat your neighbor, or speak ill of the divine. Even if you did all three, you better not say so. And when your heart gets weighed against the feather of truth, you better hope your thoughts were pure. If not, say hello to Amit, the devourer of souls. Part crocodile, part lion, part hippo, all game over. That's why you don't even joke about the gods. You don't question the pharaoh's divinity. You definitely don't roll your eyes during temple festivals, even when they go on for hours and someone's chanting off key. Your public self, your private self, even your mental self, all under surveillance, divine and social. But somehow, you get used to it. You whisper the right words, bow at the right time, smile through the incense. Because here, belief isn't just faith, it's protocol. And honestly, in a world of crocodiles, curses, collapsing ramps, and sunburned regrets, pissing off the gods feels like the worst gamble of all. Let's say something went wrong today. Maybe a block slipped. Maybe your foot found the one nail-shaped rock in the quarry. Maybe your body just decided it had had enough. Whatever the reason, you're hurt. So, you go see the doctor. Except, doctor in ancient Egypt is a very different experience. You don't walk into a clean, tiled room with softly humming machines and lavender hand sanitizer. You kneel in a mud brick hut, hoping the man in front of you knows the difference between a sprained ankle and a curse from a jealous spirit. Egyptian medicine is fascinating, advanced even for its time. They knew how to set bones, stitch wounds, and even remove abscesses. But for every sharp tool, there's a matching protective spell. Healing wasn't just science, it was magic, and lots of it. First, you get inspected. Your injury is poked, prodded, and probably blamed on something spiritual. Ah, the healer says, you must have offended a minor river god. Of course. That explains the sprained wrist. Then comes the remedy. If you're lucky, it's a paste of honey, moldy bread, and herbs. Sounds weird, but it kind of works. Honey is antibacterial, mold has penicillin-like properties, and the herbs, well, they smell nice. Just don't ask about expiration dates. If you're less lucky, you get a poultice made of cow dung, crushed dates, and lizard blood. Why? Because someone wrote it on papyrus 600 years ago and no one's dared challenge the recipe since. Got a headache? Prepare for a rub-down with crushed onions and a chant to Thoth while someone smears oil across your forehead and draws protective symbols on your chest. Toothache? Sorry, friend. Egyptian bread ground your molars down to nubs by age 25. If one gets infected, the options are live with it, let it kill you. Have it yanked with tongs forged by someone who normally makes door hinges. Surgery? It existed, but so did no anesthesia. You'd get a friend to hold your arms while the doctor digs in with a blade, chanting to Sekhmet and hoping the gods are in a good mood that day. And let's not forget the amulets. For childbirth, fevers, back pain, mysterious sneezing, there's always a charm to wear. Healing wasn't complete until your necklace collection matched your level of panic. So yes, Egyptian medicine was impressive for its era. But in practice, you walked in with a wound. and walked out with honey on your arm, a lizard-based ointment on your chest, and a growing suspicion that your soul might be under review. You've made it through another scorching day, barely. Your hands are torn. Your back is one wrong bend away from collapsing. Your soul feels like it's leaking out through your sandals. You might think the worst is over, but here's the twist. In ancient Egypt, the real test doesn't come when you're alive. It comes after you die. Death, in this world, isn't rest. It's paperwork. Cosmic, eternal, soul-shredding paperwork. Let's imagine you collapse tonight from exhaustion, peacefully, between two mud brick walls and a buzzing fly that never gave up. Your body is wrapped, prayed over, and buried, hopefully with a few trinkets. Job done? Not even close. Your soul now enters the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. First stop, the Hall of Maat. Here, you're not alone. You're standing before a tribunal of 42 gods. Yes, 42. Each with a question, each judging your life in meticulous detail. It's like being audited by the entire divine HR department. You're asked to recite the negative confession, a checklist of sins you didn't commit. I did not steal. I did not lie. I did not curse the gods. I did not covet my neighbor's ox. And so on. One mistake, one stutter, one forgotten line. That's not a wrong answer. That's obliteration. But wait, there's more. Your heart is weighed on a giant golden scale, opposite the feather of Ma'at, the symbol of truth and balance. If your heart is heavier, because of lies, cruelty, or maybe that time you grumbled about your supervisor during lunch, it fails the test. There is no appeal process. Instead, your soul is tossed to Amit, a monstrous fusion of crocodile, lion, and hippo whose entire job is to eat failures. You aren't punished, you are erased. No afterlife, no field of reeds, no second chances, just nothing. And here's the chilling part. You could live a full life, work yourself to the bone, raise kids, never steal so much as a fishtail. But if you think the wrong thought in that judgment room, if you slip up once in the script, that's it, eternity gone. All because your one bad day didn't match Ma'at's expectations. This is why Egyptians didn't just fear death, they prepared for it obsessively. Tombs were stocked with food, scrolls, maps, and even little servant dolls called shabti to do your chores in the afterlife. Yes, they were preparing to work less when dead than when alive. But most people couldn't afford that. No gold mask, no carved sarcophagus. Just a hope that living an honest life, saying the right things, and never offending the wrong god at the wrong time might be enough. In ancient Egypt, dying was just the beginning. And surviving that, well, that required perfection. So no pressure. Just make sure you didn't accidentally step on sacred soil, insult a cat, or say something sarcastic during a full moon festival. Because one mistake doesn't just cost you a job. It might cost you forever. So, would you last a day as a pyramid builder? Let's review. You woke up sweating. You bathed in a crocodile-infested river. You ate sand disguised as bread, drank porridge pretending to be beer, burned your feet, blistered your hands, dodged curses, chanted apologies to cat statues, and carried rocks that would give forklifts an identity crisis. And that was just Monday morning. You didn't have shoes. You didn't have soap. You didn't have sunscreen, personal space, coffee, or a single ergonomic anything. The closest thing you had to a benefit package was not getting devoured by a spiritual lizard-lion hybrid in the afterlife. And yet, millions of people lived this life. Not for a day, not for a week. For generations, they endured the sun, the sand, the labor, and the gods. Not for fame, not for luxury, but because that's what survival looked like. And here's the thing. They laughed. They sang. They loved. They had children, told stories, danced during festivals, and left behind monuments so massive they still baffle modern engineers. So no, you probably wouldn't make it through one shift on the pyramid site, but they did, every day, with grit, with faith, with no complaint too loud, and no mistake too final. And maybe that's the real takeaway. When your coffee machine breaks, when traffic makes you late, when your inbox is on fire, maybe take a breath. because at least you're not scrubbing yourself with sand, hoping a crocodile doesn't interpret eye contact as a challenge. Thanks for spending the day in their sandals. Now, go stretch your back, drink some cold water, and give a silent nod to the ancient workers who did the impossible, with sunburnt skin, calloused hands, and absolutely no PTO. Sleep well. You've earned it, even if they never really got to. I don't remember my name, but I remember that morning. The sun was out, but not too harsh. The smell of burnt bread floated from the bakery on the corner. Someone next door was arguing. About a dog or a debt. I couldn't tell. Just another day in Pompei. I woke up a bit late. My head still foggy from last night's wine. Not that I'm an addict. Wine here costs less than clean water. I reached for my wooden sandals, stepped outside, and felt tiny specks of dust underfoot. Maybe there was a funeral yesterday, or someone just swept the street badly again. The bakery was open. I stopped in for a loaf. Still warm, just a bit burnt on the bottom. Perfect. One hand on bread, the other on my morning cup of wine diluted. 3 parts water, 1 part wine. I'm not a barbarian. I sat on the stone steps and watched people go by. Across the street, some kids were throwing rocks. An old man was scratching rude words into a wall and chuckling like a child. 2 working girls were arguing over prices. Again. The city was loud, familiar, alive. I didn't know it would be my last breakfast. Ash started falling like rice dust, quiet, scentless, not hot. I caught a bit in my palm and laughed, thinking someone was burning wet wood. But then, something felt off. The sunlight dimmed, not darkness, but a strange, smoky grey. Someone looked up. I followed, and I saw Vesuvius exhale. Still, no one ran. I kept chewing my bread. You see, there were no sirens, no screams, no angels in the sky. Just a beautiful day, like any other. And sometimes, it's the most ordinary days that kill you the softest. The bread was still warm in my hand when the first bit of ash landed in my cup. It floated there for a second, white and weightless, then slowly sank into the wine, like dust into memory. I took another sip anyway. Too early in the day to waste good wine, even the kind that's more water than grape. We Romans didn't drink wine to celebrate. We drank it to begin. A day wasn't real until it was softened around the edges by that quiet, sour bite of diluted alcohol. Besides, no one took breakfast too seriously in Pompei. We weren't Greeks. No olives and cheeses spread across clean platters. No philosophers waxing poetic between bites. We had bread. Hard, blackened, honest bread. And if you were lucky, it came with a smear of something. Garum, maybe, or old honey if someone in your household liked you. This morning my luck was average. Just bread. Still, it was warm, which meant I'd beaten the midday crowd. The baker down the alley had his fire going since before dawn. You could always smell him before you saw him. Yeast, smoke, and sweat. He wore the same stained tunic every day, and his right eye twitched when he handled the oven door, like he knew it had a temper of its own. We all had our routines. The baker baked. The bath attendant shouted about towels. I sat on my step, tore off bits of crust, and watched Pompei wake up. The women who ran the tavern 2 houses down were dragging out chairs and sweeping the floor like it mattered. Their wine was cheaper than most. Their stew was saltier than a sailor's tongue, and yet the place was always full by noon. Not because of the food, because it was shaded. And the wine, again, did the job. Some mornings, like this one, I wondered how long I could keep living like this. Not in any dramatic way, just wondering. My tunic was fraying at the hem. My shoes were more whole than sole. I hadn't seen my brother in 2 summers. I didn't remember the last time someone touched my shoulder just to be kind. Still, there was comfort in sameness. The same bread, the same wine, the same routine that wrapped around your day like a worn-out blanket. You didn't question it too much. You just held on. The tavern girl, Mira, I think that was her name, passed by and nodded. I nodded back. That was our relationship. 2 nods a day, no words. I liked it that way. Too many words in the morning made everything feel less solid. Behind her, a cart rattled down the street, piled with fish. The smell made my stomach lurch, but I smiled. That cart always passed by around this time, like a marker, on the sundial of the street. Predictable, grounding. And then came the smallest sound, like a sigh beneath the earth. Not enough to make you jump, just enough to make you pause mid-bite. I looked at the wine in my cup. It rippled, only slightly, like someone had breathed too close. No one else seemed to notice. A child nearby was still laughing. A man 3 doors down was still yelling at his wife, or his dog, or both. And me? I kept chewing. Because here's the thing about Roman mornings. They belong to the living. The dead wait until dusk. And I wasn't ready to give the day away. I stood up, brushed crumbs from my lap, and walked toward the fountain. A line was already forming. The water flowed slow today. Too many people. Not enough pressure. A woman in front of me muttered something about the gods being displeased again. I rolled my eyes, but only inwardly. Out loud, I said nothing. The gods were always displeased, if you listened to people long enough. A stray dog sniffed my ankle, then wandered off. I dipped my cup into the stream of water, rinsed the ash from the wine, and drank again. A little earth never hurt anyone, or so I thought. Looking back now, I wonder why I didn't leave right then, why none of us did. There were signs, sure. The tremors, the odd-coloured sky, the smoke rising just a little too steadily from the mountain that was supposed to sleep. But we were Romans. We built roads and baths and aqueducts. We conquered Gaul. We invented concrete. Surely, if the world was ending, someone would have told us. Or maybe we all saw it coming. Maybe we just didn't want to believe that something so large, so final, could begin on a morning so ordinary. So I finished my wine. I took another bite of bread, now cooling in my hand, and I walked back toward my house, toward the shade, toward the quiet. The ash was falling heavier now. I told myself it was nothing, just dust, just summer, just life. The strange thing is, we never feared the mountain. Not once, not ever. It stood there, hulking in the distance, a dark blue shadow behind the temples and rooftops. Sometimes the clouds curled around its peak like a lazy god's breath. Sometimes the sunrise turned it gold. We thought it was beautiful. But dangerous? Number never. You have to understand, we didn't even have a word for volcano. That came later, after us, after the ash, after the silence. Volcanus was a name for a fire god, not a geological threat. The idea that a mountain could explode and bury us alive. That was myth. Drama. Theatre. Not life. The mountain was part of the background, like the birds, or the smell of fish, or the sound of sandals slapping stone. Familiar, distant, silent. If you had told me that morning, while I was sitting there, eating burnt bread and sipping lukewarm wine, that the mountain was about to kill us all, I would have laughed, or rolled my eyes, or offered you a drink and told you to go lie down. Because people didn't talk about Vesuvius. They talked about taxes, about who was sleeping with whom, about which baker used cheap flour, about the gladiator games in a few days, about how the bathhouse was closed again because someone pooped in the pool. That was Pompei. That was what mattered. Even the old people didn't tell mountain stories. No whispered tales of lava or fire or ancient warnings. If there had been eruptions before, they'd faded from memory like chalk washed by rain. The mountain hadn't made a sound in hundreds of years, so we assumed it never would. And assumptions are comfortable. They let you sleep at night. They let you plan dinner. I once asked a merchant why he built his new house so close to the mountain. He grinned and said, "If the gods want me gone, they'll find me no matter where I sleep." Then he handed me a slice of honey cake and winked. That was our safety plan. Hope, denial, and sweet desserts. But maybe the signs were always there. We just didn't want to see them. The ground had been shaking more often. Small tremors that rattled the shelves and made the wine slosh. We blamed it on the neighbours, on construction, on the gods being moody. The dogs had started acting strange, barking at nothing, refusing to go outside. Wells were drying. Birds flew in odd patterns. Lucia's bread was rising too fast. We noticed. We all noticed. We just didn't say anything. Not out loud. Not together. Because what would be the point? You can't flee a mountain. You can't outrun the sky. So we kept walking, kept selling, kept flirting, kept sweeping ash off our steps like it was just dirt from the road. Pompei was good at pretending. We were masters of distraction. The town was always busy, always noisy. The streets never empty. The gossip never stopped. There was no room for doom in our daily lives. Only drama. And drama was comforting, predictable, safe. We liked our disasters to be human-sized. Affairs, debts, sickness, stolen chickens. These were things we could argue about, shake fists at, survive. But mountains didn't fit into our stories. So when Vesuvius began to hiss, to groan, to send curls of smoke into the sky, we didn't react. Not at first. We told ourselves it was steam, or a cloud, or some god having a tantrum on Olympus. I remember a man walking past me with a basket of figs. He looked at the rising smoke, then looked back at his basket and muttered, "Storm's coming." He didn't stop walking. That was our attitude. Not fear, just inconvenience. The ash started falling thicker. It clung to hair, to robes, to bread crusts. My cup had a thin grey ring around the rim. Still I drank. Still, Lucia's bakery had a line. Still, the bathhouse reopened. Because nothing had officially happened. No messenger had come. No temple had sounded an alarm. There were no rules for this. No protocol, no old scroll to follow. So we waited, in silence, in denial. And in that waiting, something fragile cracked. Not in the mountain, in us. I remember seeing a child looking at his mother with wide, quiet eyes. He asked nothing. She said nothing. But the way she held his hand, tight, trembling, too long, that said everything. I remember the silence growing heavier than the ash. I could hear my own breath. I could hear the pigeons beating their wings like drums against the sky. I could hear my heart asking, over and over, "Is this it? Is this real?" But no one answered. No priest declared it divine. No senator gave a speech. No god appeared. Just the mountain, just the smoke, and the slow, soft realization that maybe we had never been safe. Not really. Maybe the mountain had always been watching, waiting, patient. We thought we ruled this place. With our bricks, our streets, our baths, our coins. But now I wonder, were we living on top of a city, or inside the mouth of something ancient and asleep? And that morning, wasn't it just the moment when it decided to wake up? The strange thing is, we never feared the mountain. Not once, not ever. It stood there, hulking in the distance, a dark blue shadow behind the temples and rooftops. Sometimes the clouds curled around its peak like a lazy god's breath. Sometimes the sunrise turned it gold. We thought it was beautiful. But dangerous? Number never. You have to understand, we didn't even have a word for volcano. That came later, after us, after the ash, after the silence. Volcanus was a name for a fire god, not a geological threat. The idea that a mountain could explode and bury us alive. That was myth. Drama. Theatre. Not life. The mountain was part of the background, like the birds, or the smell of fish, or the sound of sandals slapping stone. Familiar, distant, silent. If you had told me that morning, while I was sitting there, eating burnt bread and sipping lukewarm wine, that the mountain was about to kill us all, I would have laughed, or rolled my eyes, or offered you a drink and told you to go lie down. Because people didn't talk about Vesuvius. They talked about taxes, about who was sleeping with whom, about which baker used cheap flour, about the gladiator games in a few days, about how the bathhouse was closed again because someone pooped in the pool. That was Pompei. That was what mattered. Even the old people didn't tell mountain stories. No whispered tales of lava or fire or ancient warnings. If there had been eruptions before, they'd faded from memory like chalk washed by rain. The mountain hadn't made a sound in hundreds of years, so we assumed it never would. And assumptions are comfortable. They let you sleep at night. They let you plan dinner. I once asked a merchant why he built his new house so close to the mountain. He grinned and said, "If the gods want me gone, they'll find me no matter where I sleep." Then he handed me a slice of honey cake and winked. That was our safety plan. Hope, denial, and sweet desserts. But maybe the signs were always there. We just didn't want to see them. The ground had been shaking more often, small tremors that rattled the shelves and made the wine slosh. We blamed it on the neighbors, on construction, on the gods being moody. The dogs had started acting strange, barking at nothing, refusing to go outside. Wells were drying. Birds flew in odd patterns. Lucia's bread was rising too fast. We noticed. We all noticed. We just didn't say anything. Not out loud. Not together. Because what would be the point? You can't flee a mountain. You can't outrun the sky. So we kept walking, kept selling, kept flirting, kept sweeping ash off our steps like it was just dirt from the road. Pompei was good at pretending. We were masters of distraction. The town was always busy, always noisy. The streets never empty. The gossip never stopped. There was no room for doom in our daily lives. Only drama. And drama was comforting, predictable, safe. We liked our disasters to be human-sized. Affairs, debts, sickness, stolen chickens. These were things we could argue about, shake fists at, survive. But mountains didn't fit into our stories. So when Vesuvius began to hiss, to groan, to send curls of smoke into the sky, we didn't react. Not at first. We told ourselves it was steam, or a cloud, or some god having a tantrum on Olympus. I remember a man walking past me with a basket of figs. He looked at the rising smoke, then looked back at his basket and muttered, "Storm's coming." He didn't stop walking. That was our attitude. Not fear, just inconvenience. The ash started falling thicker. It clung to hair, to robes, to bread crusts. My cup had a thin grey ring around the rim. Still I drank. Still, Lucia's bakery had a line. Still, the bathhouse reopened. Because nothing had officially happened. No messenger had come. No temple had sounded an alarm. There were no rules for this. No protocol, no old scroll to follow. So we waited, in silence, in denial. And in that waiting, something fragile cracked. Not in the mountain, in us. I remember seeing a child looking at his mother with wide, quiet eyes. He asked nothing. She said nothing. But the way she held his hand, tight, trembling, too long, that said everything. I remember the silence growing heavier than the ash. I could hear my own breath. I could hear the pigeons beating their wings like drums against the sky. I could hear my heart asking, over and over, "Is this it? Is this real?" But no one answered. No priest declared it divine. No senator gave a speech. No god appeared. Just the mountain, just the smoke, and the slow, soft realization that maybe we had never been safe. Not really. Maybe the mountain had always been watching, waiting, patient. We thought we ruled this place. With our bricks, our streets, our baths, our coins. But now I wonder, were we living on top of a city, or inside the mouth of something ancient and asleep? And that morning, wasn't it just the moment when it decided to wake up? It started slowly. So slowly, in fact, that I didn't even stop chewing. The first sign, if you can even call it that, was a strange stillness. The kind of silence you don't notice until it's already taken hold. Like someone turned down the volume of the world just a little. Enough to make the hairs on your arms wake up. I was sitting on a low wall near the bakery, halfway through a crusty heel of bread, watching Mira, the tavern girl, sweep the front step for the third time that morning. She always cleaned when she was nervous. I thought it was about a boy. Maybe it was. Then came the ash. Not a storm, not an explosion, just a soft flutter in the air, like flour falling from the sky. It didn't hurt. It didn't smell. It didn't even seem urgent. People looked up, blinked, and kept moving. A man brushed his toga sleeve and cursed the baker's chimney. A child giggled, thinking it was snow. Somewhere, someone shouted, "The gods are shaking their pillows." And that was it. That was all. No panic. No running. Not yet. We Romans had seen plenty of strange weather. Hailstorms in spring, blood-coloured sunsets, smoke from wildfires. This was just another thing. Even when the ash began to stick to rooftops and gather in the corners of windowsills, most people didn't leave. A few shopkeepers started closing up early, but more out of boredom than fear. I remember one woman. I think she sold herbs. dragging her stand into the alley, muttering about how the air was bad for her mint. The baker, Tiberius, was still working, still pulling loaves from his oven, now with a damp cloth over his mouth. He gave me a look like, well, this is new, but said nothing, just handed me another loaf. It was warm, crisp, perfect, and I remember thinking, at least the bread is good today. The sky darkened by degrees, not like nightfall, but like a lamp slowly dimming. You could still see, but everything felt bruised, off colour. The shadows turned odd, like they weren't sure where to fall. Then came the sound. Not loud, not yet, just a low growl, not in the air, but in the ground, like the earth had indigestion. I stood up, not in fear, just curiosity. A few others did too. We stared toward the mountain, and there it was, Vesuvius, no longer quiet. A column of smoke rising fast, dark and angry, like someone had punched a hole in the sky. Still, we didn't run. Not yet. Why? Because we were used to noise. Earthquakes came and went. The gods made a racket sometimes. There had been tremors earlier that week. Cracked walls, spilled oil jars, a statue that fell in the temple courtyard. We shrugged, prayed, moved on. You don't evacuate a city over cracked pottery. But this wasn't pottery, and it wasn't going to stop. The ash thickened, breathing became harder. I pulled my tunic over my nose, as did others. Visibility dropped. The sun became a faint, orange smear behind the smoke. Chickens went quiet. Dogs started howling, then disappeared. That was when things shifted, when the quiet turned into tension. Not panic. Not yet. Just tension. People began gathering in streets, looking for friends, children, loved ones. Voices rose, not in screams but in questions. Have you seen Flavia? Is the temple still open? Should we head to the sea? Someone said the gods were angry. Another blamed Rome. A third insisted it was just a big storm and would pass like all the others. And me? I stood at the fountain. Ash was coating the basin. The water was still flowing, but slowly. A thin trickle, like the city was holding its breath. I rinsed my hands, now grey up to the wrists, looked at my reflection in the water, didn't recognize it, and then I heard it, the first real sound of fear. A scream. Not close, somewhere behind the forum, but it was real, raw. It broke the spell. Heads turned, conversations stopped, something cracked. Not a building, but a belief. The belief that it was going to be fine. That belief died in that scream. A heartbeat later, people started moving, fast. Some toward their homes, some toward the city gates. Others stood frozen, unsure which direction held safety. The smoke was worse now, falling not just as ash, but as grit. You could feel it between your teeth. It stuck to your tongue. My eyes burned. My lungs itched. But still, I didn't run. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Or pride. Or just the fact that I didn't know where to run to. It hadn't fully sunk in yet. That this wasn't going to stop. That the mountain we had ignored for generations was no longer waiting. It wasn't a massacre. It was a misunderstanding. We didn't die in a battle. There were no swords, no marching legions, no final speeches from rooftops. Pompei died slowly, softly, like someone dimming the lights on a party that didn't know it was over. People didn't scream at first. They coughed. They blinked. They kept brushing ash off their shoulders like it was dust that needed to be handled before guests arrived. Normal life, bless its stubbornness, held on longer than it should have. Even as the ash thickened, even as the sky turned the colour of old bruises, some people just kept going. The fish seller down the street stayed open. He tied a wet cloth over his face and yelled prices into the haze, as if he could outshout the mountain. I saw him weigh a bucket of mackerel with the same grumpy precision he always had. That bucket and his body were both found later, perfectly preserved. The baker tried one last batch. I saw him throw dough into the oven like he was racing the gods. When they dug him up centuries later, he was still near that oven. So were the loaves. There was a woman outside the bathhouse, waving a fan in front of her face, as if the air could still be cooled. Her fan had flowers painted on it. I remember thinking how delicate it looked, completely out of place in that thick grey air. I saw a man covering his cart with a tarp, not running, not shouting, just calmly trying to protect his olives. His olives. We didn't die because we were foolish. We died because we couldn't believe that something so final could start so slowly. I remember standing near the fountain, my usual spot, watching all of this unfold like a dream. A loud dream, full of motion, and yet not chaotic. Not yet. Someone ran by me, holding a child. I didn't know them. The child was crying, but the parent wasn't panicked, just moving with purpose, like they were late for lunch. I turned and saw Mira, the tavern girl. She was trying to carry a barrel of wine into the cellar. I offered to help. She refused. "It's not like we'll need it," she said with a weak smile. That smile still bothers me, because even then, in that moment of collapse, she was trying to make sense of it, trying to hold on to some version of normal, some echo of routine. She thought there would be a tomorrow. So did I. We always think there will be a tomorrow. The air grew heavier, the ash hotter. It stung now, settled in the folds of clothes, clung to skin like regret. Breathing was harder, slower. People started carrying cloths soaked in wine or water over their faces, anything to keep the dust out. We still hadn't run. Some of us didn't want to leave our shops. Some didn't want to abandon their animals. Some were just waiting for a sign, a signal, someone to tell them it was time to go. But no one came. The city had no voice. Only the mountain did. And when it spoke for real, when the first wave of pumice and rock came roaring down, crushing roofs and choking the streets, there was no longer any doubt. That was when the screaming began. That was when people ran, some blindly, others with hands clasped, calling names into a sky that no longer answered. I remember turning down a street and seeing a man frozen mid-step, not from fear, from disbelief. He looked up at the sky like it had personally betrayed him. He didn't move. Not even when the first tile from a nearby roof shattered at his feet. I moved, finally, toward nowhere in particular, just away. But away wasn't safe. There was no direction that didn't hurt. The streets twisted, the ash blinded, people collided, fell, screamed, vanished. Children were separated. Dogs wailed, and then went silent. Doors slammed shut, and never opened again. I passed the temple steps, and saw two priests trying to light incense. They were praying, out loud, in Latin, arms raised. One collapsed mid-prayer, coughing blood into his robes. Still, I kept walking, not because I knew where to go, but because standing still felt like giving up. I heard a woman calling for her mother. I heard a man chanting the same sentence over and over. "This isn't real. This isn't real." And the strangest thing? He was right. It didn't feel real. It felt like a bad dream made of grey and heat and silence that swallowed sound too quickly. And all around me, life tried to keep going. That was the tragedy. People didn't die in heroism or defiance. They died mid-action, mid-routine. One man was found crouched next to a loom, thread still in hand. A young couple lay curled together near a doorway, as if asleep. A girl held a doll. The doll was intact. Her lungs were not. No last words. No time for them. Just unfinished gestures, unclosed doors, half-eaten bread. They call it a catastrophe now, an event, a tragedy. But for us, it was simply a day like any other, until it wasn't. And when the mountain finally stopped breathing, and the silence returned, it wasn't the gods who answered. It was the dust, the ash, the shape of a city frozen not in glory, but in the final seconds of the mundane. They say time forgets. But Pompei proves it can also remember, with a precision so cruel, it almost feels like love. We were caught, not in the moment of death, but in the moment just before. That's the strange thing. No one was posed for history. No one was prepared. We were paused, frozen. When the ash finally settled, when the heat stopped burning through wood and bone, when the last breath was pulled from the air, we didn't vanish. We stayed. In the posture of our last action, in the angle of our heads, the curl of our fingers, the arch of a foot mid-step, time did not erase us. It embalmed us. They found me, centuries later, curled in a corner near the bakery, my hands still shielding my mouth, my knees pulled to my chest, my tunic dusted in grey, as if the earth had dressed me for the afterlife. They said I must have suffocated, quickly. I hope they're right. But the moment they captured wasn't the pain. It was the instinct, the body trying, even at the end, to protect itself. I wasn't alone. They found lovers, tangled together, lips nearly touching, never quite. They found a child under a table, clutching a doll with a missing arm. They found a dog, twisted mid-bark, chained to a post it could not escape. Its ribs were visible, so were its teeth. Even our animals were remembered. In one home, a woman was reaching for a shelf, just reaching, her hand still outstretched. What was she grabbing? A cloth? A charm? A memory? No one knows, but she never got there. And now, she never leaves that pose. It's strange, isn't it? We spend our whole lives moving, rushing, working, adjusting again, and in the end, we're defined by the 1 second when all that movement stops. They uncovered a table still set for lunch. Bowls, cups, a loaf of bread burnt on one side. Someone had sprinkled herbs on the stew. Someone had meant to sit. They never did. And the graffiti, oh the graffiti, survived better than most of us. Scratched onto walls with broken tile or charcoal. Secundus loves Julia. The food here is terrible. I hope your wine turns to vinegar. Our anger, our jokes, our flirtations, all still there. Our deepest philosophies, not so much, but our sarcasm, immortal. Even the bathhouse was frozen in time. They found footprints in the steam room, toes turned mid-turn, as if someone had heard something and paused. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't get the chance to find out what it was. They say Pompei is the best preserved Roman city in the world. But that's not quite true. Pompei isn't preserved. Pompei is held. Like breath. Like memory. Like something too fragile to be erased. So the earth simply decided to keep it. Sometimes I wonder if this is what immortality feels like. Not praise, not glory, but stillness. To be remembered not for what you did, but for how you stopped. I wonder if the ones who fled fared better. Some did escape. They ran when the sky turned black and the air became knives. They abandoned their homes, their trinkets, their names carved in stone. They vanished into history's fog. We stayed, not by choice, but by chance, or fate, or some combination of both. And because we stayed, we became something else. Not citizens, not workers, not bakers or slaves or bathers. Just evidence. They walk past us now, tourists, historians, children holding guidebooks and licking gelato. They stare at our shapes through glass, whisper about us, in hushed tones like we're sleeping. They forget we were them. We woke up late. We drank too early. We loved the wrong people. We overcooked the bread. We missed the signs. We lived. And because of how we died, you can see how we lived. Every plaster cast, every fossilized breath, every scorched loaf and scribbled insult, they're not symbols, they're echoes. Not of tragedy, but of intimacy. Pompei didn't die dramatically. It died domestically. It died in kitchens, on stairwells, in gardens, under beds, in mid-conversation with one shoe on. And the earth, in a strange act of kindness or cruelty, kept it all. So here I remain, hands still half raised, mouth still half covered. Not a hero, not a statue, just a person, caught at the end of a very normal day. And if time ever lets go of me, I hope it remembers more than how I died. I hope it remembers I liked my bread warm, my wine watery, and my mornings quiet. For nearly 17 centuries, we were silent. We lay beneath layers of ash and time, stacked like pages in a forgotten book, undisturbed, unread. We weren't mourned, we weren't remembered, we simply paused. The city above us shifted, names changed, roads crumbled, empires rose and fell, and still, we stayed, pressed into the earth, caught in the moment before our world folded in on itself. And then, one day, long after we'd stopped waiting, the ground opened again. At first, it was small things. Farmers digging in vineyards struck stone instead of root. Builders uncovered painted walls when laying foundations, pottery, bones, fragments, hints, whispers. But then came shovels, then came curiosity, and then, finally, came history. They called it an archaeological wonder, a miracle, a city trapped in time, and they weren't wrong. But what they didn't expect, what none of them could have known, was just how alive we still were. Because when they uncovered Pompeii, they didn't just find buildings and tools. They found us. Not statues, not skeletons laid out in neat lines like museum displays. Us, in motion, in habit, in the middle of sentences that would never end. They peeled away centuries of ash and discovered laughter etched into tavern walls, grocery lists scrawled in charcoal, doodles in bedrooms, offensive jokes in public toilets, recipes, price tags, love notes. They unearthed kitchens still stained from last night's wine, loaves of bread carbonized in ovens that never had the chance to cool, tables still set, with cups knocked over mid-meal. One even had a chicken leg still intact. But the strangest discovery? We weren't that different from them. We wore cheap clothes. We gossiped. We prayed, complained, flirted, lied. We lost earrings down floor cracks. We stubbed our toes. We got drunk. We promised to change, and didn't. And somehow, even without our voices, they heard us. They read the graffiti we left and laughed. They walked our narrow streets and said, "This reminds me of my neighborhood." They stared at the body of a man curled up by a garden wall and whispered, "He could be my father." We stopped being relics. We started being familiar. One archaeologist wrote that Pompeii was like shaking hands with a stranger who turned out to be your mirror. I liked that, because when they found us, they didn't resurrect emperors or gods. They resurrected people. Us, the background characters of history. The shopkeepers, the wine pourers, the mothers with tired arms, the teenagers scribbling dirty poetry on public columns. You can study our coins, our plumbing, our roads. You can analyze the height of our walls and the pigment of our murals. But it's the little things that matter more. Like the woman buried with 2 rings on one finger, or the man who died clutching a key and nothing else, or the boy whose footprints in the bathhouse never found their way back out. They say Pompeii is the best preserved ancient city on earth. I say it's the most human, because we didn't leave behind grand declarations. We left behind interruptions, interrupted meals, interrupted prayers, interrupted lives. And those interruptions, those messy, mundane, half-finished moments, turned out to be the most powerful story of all, because they show something deeper than victory, or art, or architecture. They show presence, proof that we were here, that we lived, not just gloriously or terribly, but completely, that we argued and loved and spilled things, and that we mattered, not because we were great, but because we were real. I sometimes wonder what it felt like, that first day someone brushed dust off a mosaic floor and saw the pattern underneath. What it felt like to be the first person in 1,600 years to open a door we thought would never open again. And I wonder if they realized they weren't walking into a ruin. They were walking into a room someone had just left, into a home that had been waiting, into a story that hadn't finished yet. You can map our streets now. You can digitize our murals. You can 3D print our cups and sell them in gift shops. But you'll never fully grasp what Pompeii is until you feel the strange hum in your chest when you look into the hollow of a plaster cast and see someone. Not a figure, not a fossil. Someone who once tied their sandals, cursed the taxes, and burned their breakfast. Someone who would have looked at your clothes, your gadgets, your funny accent, and still understood you, because we were you. And in some ways, maybe we still are. They didn't die in epic poses. They didn't raise fists to the sky or whisper poetic last words. Most of them didn't even know it was over. And maybe that's what makes it hit harder. They died the way we live. Messy, distracted, mid-thought. One hand stirring a pot, one foot halfway into a sandal, one sentence left unfinished, still hanging in the air like ash. There's something honest about that, because we like to imagine we'll be ready, that when our time comes, we'll have clarity, that we'll say something wise, something worthy of remembering. But Pompeii reminds us, you probably won't. You'll be thinking about groceries, or bills, or whether you left the door unlocked. You'll be scrolling, chewing, yawning, checking your reflection. You'll be reaching for coffee or closing a tab. You'll be waiting for someone to reply. And then, silence. That's how it happened for them. The woman who died with her child in her arms wasn't prepared. She was just trying to protect the one thing that mattered. The man in the street, caught mid-run, wasn't escaping fate, just buying time. The baker, still near his oven, didn't think the heat outside would ever rival the fire inside. They weren't heroic. They were human, which is, somehow, even more moving, because we don't remember them for their greatness. We remember them because we saw ourselves in them, in their half-written graffiti, in their clumsy footprints, in their burnt bread and broken jars and stubborn daily rituals. We remember them because they remind us of the strange beauty of ordinary days. And maybe that's the lesson, not to fear the end, but to pay attention to the middle. To the small things, the coffee still warm, the joke someone almost finished, the way sunlight hits the wall at 4:17 p.m. Because that's what we'll leave behind. Not monuments, not epics. Moments. Moments so real they outlived our names. So if you're reading this, or listening to it, don't wait for the story to wrap up neatly. Don't wait for the perfect day to feel grateful. Don't assume the ending will give you time to prepare. Live the way they died. Present, unpolished, halfway through something simple. Because that's where life really happens. And sometimes, where it ends. Before she ruled an empire with a pen sharper than any sword, Wu Zetian was just a girl, young, quiet, and dangerously observant. She wasn't born into glory. She wasn't chosen by heaven. She was selected like an ornament, brought into the palace not to speak, but to please. And for a while, she played her part. Beautiful, composed, forgettable. But Wu Zetian didn't forget. She remembered the names of the women who smiled too much, the men who promised too quickly, and the servants who disappeared too quietly. She memorized patterns, not just in embroidery, but in power. And when the old emperor died, and she was cast into a convent like discarded silk, she waited, not with hope, but with calculation. Because she knew one truth that history never liked to admit. Power is rarely given, it's taken. When she returned to the palace, it wasn't by accident or affection, it was design. Cold, deliberate, brilliant design. She did not seduce an empire. She rewrote its rules. And whether you call her a savior or a serpent, history can't change this. In over 2,000 years, only one woman ever sat on the dragon throne. Not beside it, not behind it, but on it. Why just one? Maybe because that one was enough to show the world what it feared most. A woman who didn't ask for permission. A woman who didn't just survive history. She bent it. They brought me to the palace when I was 14. Not because I was brilliant, not because I had done anything worth remembering, but because I had the right kind of face. Smooth, pale, quiet. The kind of face that wouldn't cause trouble. They didn't need me to be smart. They needed me to be silent. So I was. I became a concubine of Emperor Taizong, one of dozens. I wasn't in the inner circle. I wasn't even in the outer circle. I was background. I poured tea. I bowed. I watched. No one noticed me. And that was their mistake. Because I noticed everything. I saw which consorts were favoured, and which ones vanished. I saw how the eunuchs held more power than half the ministers. I saw the way the emperor stared into the fire when he thought no one was watching, like he was already speaking to his ancestors. And I saw his son, Li Ji, gentle eyes, a quiet voice. He didn't carry himself like a prince. He carried himself like a question no one had answered yet. When Emperor Taizong died, I was still young and barely remembered. As was tradition, the emperor's unused concubines, his leftover women as they called us, were sent to a convent. It was supposed to be peaceful, spiritual, a graceful ending for women who had failed to produce heirs. But it was exile in silk. They shaved my head, gave me robes, gave me a name that wasn't mine, and they left me there, among quiet halls and silent prayers, where even time seemed to forget us. But I didn't forget. I cleaned the altars with my hands, and I memorized the chants, not for the gods, for survival, because even in a place built for stillness, power leaves traces. The high-ranking nuns who traded favors with court ladies, the messengers who still slipped in at night with scrolls and coins. I learned the rhythm of silence. I learned that being forgotten was a kind of freedom. But I also learned that no one is ever truly forgotten in a palace. Not if someone remembers you. It was Li Ji who brought me back. He was emperor now, Emperor Gaozong of Tang. He remembered the quiet girl in the corner of his father's court. I don't know what he remembered exactly. Maybe my voice. Maybe the way I bowed without shaking. Maybe the fact that I never tried to catch his eye, and in that, became the only one he couldn't stop thinking about. Either way, I returned, not as a girl, but as a woman who knew exactly how dangerous second chances were. They didn't welcome me with open arms. They hissed. They whispered. I was a ghost from a reign that had already been buried. I was supposed to be behind monastery walls forever. They called it unnatural, improper, blasphemous. But I had spent enough time in the shadows to know something important. People don't fear what's proper. They fear what they can't predict. So I let them whisper. The empress at the time, Wang, saw me as an echo of the past. Harmless. She was wrong. I didn't want her husband. I wanted her throne. Not out of love, not even out of ambition. But because I had seen what happened to women with no title, no power, and no voice, I had lived it. So I learned the language of survival. Not poetry, not politics, but mothers-in-law, midwives, servants, secrets. They said I used my beauty. Maybe I did, but so did they. They said I lied. I didn't. I just waited for the truth to arrive at the right time. They said I accused Empress Wang of killing my daughter. What I remember is this. I gave birth to a girl. She died suddenly, inexplicably. The only people near her that day were two women. One was a nursemaid. The other was the Empress. I wept. Not publicly. That wasn't allowed. But I wept. And when I dried my tears, I realized that the palace didn't need proof. It needed performance. So I let them believe what they wanted to believe. And in time, the Empress lost her title. I took it. Not with poison, not with knives, with grief and silence which were sharper. And I rose. Not in a blaze of glory, not in a march of triumph. I rose like smoke, slow, curling, suffocating. There was no proclamation, no applause. Just the quiet shifting of titles, the lowering of gazes, the reshuffling of rooms. I became empress. I bore sons. I buried daughters. I learned which generals had hollow loyalties, which ministers flinched at female counsel, and which servants could be bought with kindness instead of coin. But deep down, I never left the convent. I kept that silence with me, wore it like a second skin, because the girl they tried to erase behind monastery walls was not dead. She had just learned how to wait. And now, she had stopped waiting. Power isn't always taken in a storm. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, like steam rising from hot tea. No noise, just presence. When I became empress, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't punish my enemies in public. I didn't need to, because by then, they were already afraid, not of what I'd do, but of what I might be thinking. It's funny how fear grows fastest in silence. The ministers didn't know what to make of me. They'd never dealt with an empress who asked for reports at midnight, who remembered every name in the court, who knew the salary of a grain official in Henan, and also the mistress he kept in secret. They whispered that I was unnatural, that I read too much, knew too much, slept too little. But I smiled. I sat in silence beside the emperor. I nodded at their words, as if they meant something. The truth is, I didn't need to outsmart them. I only had to outlast them. Because men like that, men who believe the empire is stitched into their sleeves, they unravel themselves. Slowly, predictably. All I had to do was give them room to do it. I replaced no one at first. I praised the existing chancellors, bowed to their judgment, listened more than I spoke. I requested no new titles, no new privileges, but I asked questions. Innocent ones. Who managed the canal taxes? Why were the military provisions delayed in the north? What happened to that official who vanished after questioning the treasury? People assume change begins with declarations. I've learned it begins with small discomforts, with someone at the table who doesn't speak, but never breaks eye contact. Even the emperor, my husband, didn't know when I became more than his wife. It didn't happen in one night. It was a drift, a tilt. One day he stopped reading reports before handing them to me. One day his advisors started looking at me when asking permission. One day the palace doors stayed open when I passed, and no one questioned why. I didn't give orders, I gave advice. And advice, unlike orders, is harder to accuse of ambition. I created my own circle, quietly. Not a rebellion, not a court faction, just women who knew how to listen and men who knew how to stay loyal because they had nowhere else to go. Eunuchs. Widows. Scholars from lower families. They had no legacy to protect, only futures to build. And I remembered their names. Not out of kindness, but because kindness was my camouflage. I sponsored temples, donated land, gave titles to scholars who wrote the right poems. I honored mothers, visited shrines, wept at funerals of generals I'd never met. Every gesture mattered. Every tear had weight, because while they watched for the knife, I was already inside the room. At first, they underestimated me. Then they ignored me. Then they talked about me in low tones, just outside earshot. And then one day, they realized I wasn't moving around them. I was moving through them. And I hadn't stabbed a single man. I'd let their own habits do the bleeding. Corruption was everywhere. I didn't invent it. But I understood it. I understood how one minister's brother owed taxes, how another's son had married into a scandal. I never threatened. I never accused. I just asked if they were sleeping well lately. I just asked if their wife was recovering from that strange fever. I let them draw their own conclusions. And soon enough, they drew their own exits. Some resigned. Some died. Some begged for exile. Each time I said nothing. I mourned publicly. I sent gifts to their families. I made sure the whispers said I was grieving deeply. But grief is a mask power wears when it wants to look polite. The emperor started to fade. Headaches, vision problems, fatigue. The physicians tried everything. Acupuncture, herbs, prayers, but nothing fixed the slow dimming behind his eyes. And while they worried over his body, I worried over the throne. Not because I wanted it, not yet, but because I knew what happened to women who stood beside weak kings. They were blamed, used, removed, buried. So I positioned myself as protector, not of him, but of the dynasty. When our son was named heir, I wept for joy, publicly, privately. I took note of every official who hesitated to congratulate me. Some thought I would step back now, be the Empress Dowager. Let the boy rule. Let the men advise him. But I had seen what happened to regents who stepped back. They were forgotten. I didn't need a title. I had the habit. The system bent toward me already. Ministers asked me before they asked him. Generals waited for my letters before they moved. The empire didn't care what name was carved into the throne. It cared who signed the documents. I didn't seize power in a coup. I didn't scream. I didn't strike. I simply made it impossible for the empire to run without me. And by the time they noticed, I was already the one keeping it upright. No one could accuse me of treason. I hadn't broken any laws, but I had rewritten the expectations. And for men who had built their entire careers on being obeyed, that was treason enough. There were no rules written for someone like me. That was the first rule I learned. In the Empire of Tang, the throne was meant for sons, never daughters. Empresses were shadows beside emperors, decorative, deferential, silent. They bore heirs, played instruments, and smiled during ceremonies, but they did not rule. Not in name, not officially, but I had long since stopped asking what I was allowed to be. Because the truth is, when a woman waits to be allowed, she waits forever. When my husband, the emperor, fell deeper into illness, the court called it fatigue. I called it the beginning of vacancy. He still wore the robes, still signed the edicts, but more and more the brush trembled in his hand. The ministers looked to me now, not for permission, but for certainty, and I gave it. At first, I signed in his name. Then I signed in ours. And eventually, I stopped pretending. They said I couldn't rule. I said, "Show me where it says I can't." They couldn't, because no law had ever imagined this moment. A woman not just advising power or whispering behind the throne, but becoming the throne. So I did what they feared most. I made it real. I began issuing imperial decrees myself, first as regent, then as acting sovereign. I sat on the throne, took audiences, judged criminal cases, appointed generals. I built alliances with scholars who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. I restructured examination systems, promoted commoners who wrote well, not just nobles who bowed low, the elite snarled. But I wasn't here to preserve tradition. I was here to prove it was never sacred. They called it blasphemy, said a woman couldn't serve as the son of heaven. I agreed. So I changed the title. I declared the start of a new dynasty, the Zhou, not a rebellion, a replacement, not chaos, just redirection, and I wasn't empress anymore. I was emperor, the only woman in China's history to claim that word for herself, the only one who didn't flinch under its weight. They didn't know what to call me. Your Majesty didn't feel right on their tongues. Your Grace was too soft. Some refused to speak at all, choosing instead to bow until their foreheads kissed the stone. That was fine. I preferred silence anyway. In silence, people tell you the most about themselves. I wasn't interested in palaces or parades. I was interested in control, the kind that didn't need swords or blood to hold. I restructured court rankings, balanced power between ministries, created bureaus that reported directly to me. I listened to village complaints, reduced taxes, invested in agriculture, opened trade. I did what emperors were supposed to do. But because I was a woman, every act was suspicious. Every decision was political theatre. If I was merciful, I was manipulative. If I was strict, I was cruel. If I was generous, I was trying to buy loyalty. They had no category for a woman who ruled well, so they made one up. They called me a tyrant. They spread rumours, some laughable, some vicious, that I bathed in the blood of virgins, that I murdered my own children, that I slept with priests and gave birth to demons, that I built a tower of torture inside the palace and fed my enemies to wolves. I didn't need to deny it. The louder the lies, the more they revealed about the men who told them. And still, I ruled. They said I was unnatural, that I had stepped outside my place. But what they really meant was, I had claimed a place that was never built for me, and made it stronger than it had ever been before. Because here's something they never wrote in the records. The empire ran better under me. Crime dropped, crops rose, roads were rebuilt, the bureaucracy worked, officials were watched, merit was rewarded. I didn't care who your grandfather was. I cared if you could write policy that fed people. Of course, not everyone celebrated. There were assassination attempts, 6 that I knew of, more that never made it past whispers. Some came with daggers, some with cups of tea, some hid behind silk and smiles. I always knew. Not because I had spies, but because I understood desperation. I had lived it. I had worn it. I could smell it on their robes before they even spoke. I didn't punish all of them. Some I forgave. Forgiveness, after all, was a power men didn't expect me to use. But when I did strike back, when I removed a chancellor, or exiled a family, I did it with finality. Not because I enjoyed cruelty, but because I had learned, if you leave poison in the cup, one day, someone will drink it again. Still, I never raised armies against the people, never burned cities. I ruled with ink, not iron. But history doesn't reward that kind of strength. It only remembers the blood. They say I was paranoid. Maybe. But they forget. I was a woman ruling alone, surrounded by men raised to believe I was temporary. They say I was ambitious. Of course. But what emperor wasn't? They say I rewrote the rules. They're right. But only because the original rules were never meant for me. They never wrote about the canals I repaired. They wrote about my lovers. They didn't mention the drought relief, the agricultural loans, the granaries I filled in provinces no emperor had bothered to visit in decades. They wrote about rumours, whispers in brothels, fantasies in courtrooms, lies spun by men whose names no one remembers anymore. Because when a woman rules well, they don't call her wise. They call her dangerous. I don't need praise. I never ruled for applause. But if you're going to remember me, at least remember what mattered. I opened the gates of the civil service exams, wider than any emperor before me. Until then, the exams had favoured the sons of the elite, men born into the right name, the right network, the right ancestral tablets. I changed that. I let men of humble birth compete. If they could write policy, solve problems, argue logic and law, they had a place in my court. Farmers' sons became ministers. Orphans became magistrates. The old families hated it. They said I was weakening the bloodline. I said I was strengthening the empire. But no one wrote that part in the history books. They said I promoted eunuchs and monks. That's true. I did. Not because I loved them blindly, but because they owed their positions to no one but me. They didn't come from rival clans. They didn't have uncles plotting coups. They worked. They obeyed. And most of all, they watched everything. You need eyes when you're ruling, surrounded by men waiting for you to blink. They said I built secret police. I didn't. I made secrets visible. I brought reports to the emperor's desk, then to mine. I demanded clarity, not whispers. I removed those who stole. I punished those who exploited famine to fill their estates. Did I go too far? Maybe. But no one complained when the roads stayed open and the grain arrived on time. I cracked down on corruption. That part they don't whisper about in tea shops, because fear of exposure is stronger than fear of the sword. They say I was vain. They described my mirrors, my robes, the cosmetics on my table. They never described the petition scrolls I read every night, from townspeople, from soldiers' widows, from farmers complaining about tax collectors. I answered them, sometimes with a stroke of ink, sometimes with an official's resignation. They say I was obsessed with control. They're right. Because I knew what happened when emperors weren't obsessed, when they left ruling to concubines' cousins, or trusted generals with too much land, or spent days with poets while bandits burned the provinces. I had seen it, and I refused to let my empire rot from neglect. So yes, I held it tight. They say I craved immortality. That's funny. Because everything I did was for people who would never know my name. I funded irrigation in the south, paved roads in the north, rebuilt temples not to glorify my reign, but to stabilize regions where rebellion brewed with every bad harvest. I passed laws protecting peasant land rights, and I ordered audits of military spending so that border troops didn't starve while court officials feasted. But those things don't make legends. They make stability, and stability is quiet. So history chose to remember the noise, the scandal, the invention. They said I had lovers, dozens, maybe hundreds, monks, officials, musicians. I don't remember them all. Most of them never existed. A few did. But let's be honest, so did every emperor before me. They had harems, entire wings of women for every passing whim. No one called them immoral. They called them patrons of beauty. I kissed fewer lips than the average crown prince. But because I was a woman, each kiss became a crime. They called me Jezebel of the East, dragon whore, she, wolf in silk. Not one of them called me effective, because they couldn't bear to admit that under my reign, the empire held. No civil war, no famine of record-breaking scale, no collapse. They needed a villain more than they needed the truth. So I gave them silence. Let the historians write what soothed their egos. Let the monks recite the sins they invented for me. Let the men of letters pretend I seduced my way to the top, because the alternative, that I outworked, outthought, and outlasted them, was too bitter to swallow. But deep down they knew. Even as they sharpened their ink to tear me down, they copied my reforms into the next dynasty, quietly, without credit, but permanently. My tax policies lasted longer than my temple name. My civil reforms outlived the dynasty I created. They buried my name, but built roads on the blueprints I left behind. That's the thing about real work. It survives spite. It survives scandal. It even survives history. So no, I don't need their approval. I just want you to know this. When they tell you I was cruel, ask who told the story. When they tell you I was immoral, ask what frightened them so much about a woman who didn't apologize for surviving. And when they tell you I left no legacy, tell them the roads are still standing. They say I killed everyone who stood in my way. They say I poisoned siblings, drowned rivals, strangled infants, silenced ministers with silk cords in the night. They say I executed so many that the palace floors never fully dried. They say I ruled with blood. But the people who said these things, were the same people who wanted me gone. Let's talk plainly. Yes, some people died. Some disappeared. Some were removed, quietly, permanently. But tell me, have you ever seen a court where no one vanishes? I didn't invent political execution. I inherited it. When I entered the palace, I stepped into a system already built on betrayal and punishment. I didn't build the machine. I just learned how to operate it better than the men before me. Was I merciful? Not often. Was I paranoid? Perhaps. But I had reason. They plotted, constantly. One group tried to replace my son with a puppet heir. Another tried to stage a coup using forged imperial seals. A general in the north raised troops without permission and marched them south to pay tribute. Tribute in those days often came with swords. You think I should have pardoned them? Do you think they would have pardoned me? They say I executed the Zhang brothers, two handsome men close to me. Lovers, some whisper. Threats, others say. Did I kill them? Number. I let them be killed by the next regime. Because power changes hands. And people love to punish the mirrors you leave behind. They say I had my own son killed. Li Hong, the eldest, the brightest, the one with his father's gentleness and none of my steel. Did I? I'll ask a better question. Who gained the most from his death? Not me. His passing broke something in me I never spoke of again. But grief doesn't make good history. So they turned sorrow into strategy, mourning into malice. It makes a better story that way. They say I tortured the empress and consort when I rose to power, that I cut off their limbs and left them in wine jars. That's a favourite, I hear. Vivid, bloody, memorable. It's also unprovable. The records are second-hand, written long after the fact by men who served under my enemies. Men who never met me, but knew exactly how much brutality the readers of their time expected from a woman in charge. And if they couldn't find enough truth, they painted over the silence with ink. I won't waste time defending myself. What matters is this. I survived a world designed to kill women like me. Every concubine was replaceable. Every empress disposable. The safest way to disappear in the Tang court was to be too quiet or too kind. I chose a different path. Was it clean? Number. But power rarely is. I never enjoyed executions. I never found pleasure in watching men fall, but I understood something the others didn't. Mercy in court politics is like perfume in poison. It smells nice, but kills just as fast. The men I removed weren't innocents plucked from peace. They were players in the same game I played. Some better, most worse. And the ones who cried foul once they lost? They wrote the stories. Because in history, the losers don't disappear. They become the narrators. They said I had a torture tower built inside the palace, that I created a secret dungeon filled with iron maidens and screaming ghosts. They also said I slept with demons. So take your pick. Truth is, when a woman punishes treason, it's cruelty. When a man does it, it's order. No one called my predecessors tyrants when they slaughtered cousins, brothers, wives, even their own children, but I wear the label proudly because I committed the same sins, only smarter. And I did it without hiding behind generals or tradition. I did it with my own name on the decree. Was there fear in my reign? Yes, I won't deny it. But fear, for a time, bought peace. It bought years of stability. It kept the wheels of empire turning when everything else threatened to fall apart. I would rather be feared than replaced. History asks, did I go too far? I ask, how far would you go if the world told you every morning you were an error that must be erased? How far would you go if your throne was balanced on a knife, and every hand that helped you up was already reaching to push you off? I didn't rule through blood. I ruled through memory. I remembered every betrayal, every fake smile, every name that paused too long before calling me emperor. And I remembered what happened to women who forgot. They were erased, buried beneath myths and metaphors, turned into monsters in scrolls written by trembling hands. If I became a monster to survive, then let them call me one. But ask yourself this. If a man had done all the same things I did, would we be calling him brilliant instead? In the world I was born into, women weren't supposed to lead. We weren't supposed to speak too much, or think too hard. or look too long. We were supposed to smile, lower our heads, produce suns, then fade. That was the script, written by men, bound in leather, sealed with ritual and silence. Confucius never mentioned me, of course. He died long before I was born. But his words shaped the world I inherited like wind-carved stone. A woman without virtue brings ruin to the home. A wise woman does not meddle in affairs beyond the inner chamber. The message was clear. Women belong behind walls, behind curtains, behind men. So when I stepped past those boundaries, not by chance, but by choice, they didn't see a ruler. They saw a violation, not of law, but of nature. That's why they didn't just call me dangerous. They called me unwomanly. Because in a world where hierarchy is sacred, and the man stands above the woman by design, my very existence was heresy. It didn't matter what I built, what I fixed, what I fed. All they could see was a woman out of place. But I wasn't out of place. I was exactly where I intended to be. The only difference was, I didn't wear shame like they expected me to. Power in the hands of a man is ambition. Power in the hands of a woman is arrogance. That's the rule, isn't it? Even now, centuries later, they still hesitate to say my name without attaching a warning to it. Wu Zetian, yes, she ruled, but Wu Zetian, yes, she was intelligent, but there's always a but. They reduce me to footnotes and folklore, to rumors and ridicule. She was seductive. She was cruel. She was cunning. Never. She was effective. Never. She was necessary. Never. She was brilliant in the ways no one taught her to be. But they loved writing about my temper. They painted me with ink soaked in fear, turning me into a cautionary tale for every girl who dared to look above her station. They said I was too bold. They said I wanted too much. They said I had the mind of a man. Funny, isn't it? The greatest insult they could find for me was intelligence. Not because they hated it, but because they weren't used to seeing it in someone who bled every month, who wore silk instead of armor, who mothered instead of marching. But tell me, how is it unnatural for a woman to rule when women are trained from birth to manage entire households? We held the families together. We budgeted. We negotiated. We settled disputes. We raised the next generation. Isn't that ruling just scaled smaller? But scale it to a nation, and suddenly, it's blasphemy. They feared me not because I was different from them, but because I wasn't. I played the same game, and I won, and they couldn't stand it. So they called me a witch, a temptress, a demon in pearls, because it was easier than calling me what I was, a ruler. Do you know what's worse than being hated? Being turned into a metaphor. They made me into a symbol of chaos, of unnatural order, of what happens when a woman forgets her place. But I never forgot my place. I just never accepted their version of it. I didn't steal the throne. I earned it, more than half the men who sat on it before me. I didn't inherit power. I built it, step by step, word by word. Not with an army, but with precision. Not with marriage, but with strategy. Not by seduction, but by observation, memory, and timing. But patriarchy has a way of rewriting brilliance into betrayal. If that brilliance doesn't wear a beard. They needed to believe I was the exception, the accident, the monster. Because if I wasn't, if I was simply capable, then it meant their systems weren't sacred. It meant women could rule just as well, and maybe better. So they buried me in myth, in slander, in shame. They etched my flaws deeper than my victories. They stretched my name into something too wide to stand on, but too sharp to forget. But even myths cast shadows, and mine was long. I didn't come to this world asking to be admired. I asked only to not be underestimated. And when they did anyway, I answered with empire. So yes, I was a woman in a man's world. I didn't fit the mold. So I melted it, poured something new, and sat on it like a throne. If they still fear that image today, then maybe I did something right. They let me live long enough to see the circle close. Not many rulers get that. Most emperors die too early, killed by ambition, wine, or war. Some fade behind curtains, surrounded by servants pretending not to count the minutes. A few are remembered in incense and marble. I died slowly, not in body, but in presence. It began with silence. Not the useful kind I had wielded for years, the kind that made men nervous, that made words weigh more. No, this was different. The kind of silence where people stop meeting your eyes in the hallway, where reports arrive later than they used to, where names you never approved start appearing in official rosters, where decisions are made and you hear about them after. I was still the emperor, but they stopped treating me like one. It wasn't rebellion. It was rot. Rot from inside. The kind that doesn't crack the walls, it hollows them. Quiet, careful, painless at first. By then I was old. Not broken, but not invincible. My body didn't move as fast. My pen shook when I signed. My voice lost the edge that once split rooms in half. And they waited. The same ministers who once trembled before my gaze now walked with straighter backs. The eunuchs who once rushed to my call took longer to bow. The whispers returned, not of my orders, but of my successors. They didn't need to overthrow me. They just needed time. They said I had lost clarity, that I was too easily swayed, that I favoured flatterers and let corruption return. Perhaps, or perhaps they simply needed a story to justify what came next. Because they didn't want me dead. Not yet. They wanted me gone, but quietly, elegantly, in a way that made it seem like it was my idea. So they advised me to abdicate. For my health, for the stability of the realm, for the future of the dynasty. They used the words I once used on others, and I recognized them. But I was tired, not of ruling, but of being surrounded by men who thought I couldn't feel the walls closing in. So I stepped down. I let them believe they had convinced me. Let them draw up the decrees. Let them escort me from the throne room I had designed with my own hand. I was no longer emperor. I was retired. What a polite word. What a perfect lie. They moved me into a side palace, not a prison, but not free, a golden birdcage, filled with silk and servants and silence. They sent visitors, just enough to claim I wasn't forgotten. They sent food, musicians, physicians, incense. But no one sent policy reports. No one asked my opinion on anything that mattered. I was alive, but politically, I had already died. And yet, even in that exile of ceremony and pretense, I knew I was still dangerous. Because memory lingers. Because I was still the only woman who had ruled. Still the shadow behind their names. Still the precedent they could not erase. So they waited for my real death. I did not go quietly. My body failed, as all bodies do. But my mind held on longer than they hoped. I wrote letters. I summoned old allies. I whispered to servants who still remembered when my word was law. But even that faded. And when the end came, there was no procession. No nationwide mourning. No divine titles carved in jade. They stripped my name from the records, my real name. They reinstated the Tang dynasty and filed my reign under interruption. Not a reign, a disturbance. A footnote between emperors. They refused to bury me with my husband. Said it would dishonor him, as if ruling beside him in life had been dishonor enough. But the greatest insult? They left my tombstone blank. A slab of polished stone with no inscription. No name, no titles, just silence. They said it was humility, that I had requested it. I didn't. They just didn't know what to write. Because how do you summarize a woman they couldn't control? How do you reduce a reign they spent years pretending never happened? So they said nothing. And in doing so, they said everything. I did not get to die like a man. I did not get ceremony, or deification, or respect. I got erasure. But erasure doesn't work on legends. The people still told stories. Some true, most twisted. They remembered the woman who ruled without asking. The one who outlived emperors, rewrote exams, removed traitors, built roads, and read every scroll in the archive twice. They remembered not just what I did, but that I dared. And that is why they feared me, even after I was gone. Because if one woman could do it, what stopped another from trying? So they left my stone blank, as if the silence would bury me deeper. But that stone is still standing, and people still come to see it. Not because of what it says, but because of what it couldn't say. I did not get to die like a proper emperor, but I lived like one. And in the end, that was enough. They still argue about me. In classrooms, in books, in dusty archives, and on glowing screens, they dissect me like a riddle that never gave them the answer they wanted. Was she cruel? Was she brilliant? Was she a tyrant or a trailblazer? They line up evidence. They count names. They circle phrases in ancient scrolls and argue over what I meant when I did this, or ordered that. But no one asks what I felt. I ruled for decades, held an empire together with words, laws, and silence. I buried enemies, raised sons, buried them too. I outlasted whispers, outlived slander, and when I died, they left my name off the stone. Yet centuries later, I'm still here, still dividing scholars, still being rewritten, still impossible to ignore. They call me a monster. Maybe I was. But I was a monster shaped by their world. A world that taught me gentleness was weakness, that kindness was currency best spent elsewhere, that if I waited for justice, I'd die before it ever arrived. So I stopped waiting. They call me a symbol. Fine. But I never asked to stand for anything but myself. I didn't dream of breaking rules. I just refused to shrink to fit them. I didn't rise to prove a point. I rose because I could, because I saw what sat above me, and I knew I could do it better. And I did. So was I better than the men around me. Number. I was exactly as ruthless, as sharp, as ambitious. But because I was a woman, that made me worse in their eyes. The same fire that made emperors legendary made me dangerous. The same decisions that made kings strong made me cold. They weren't afraid that I failed the system. They were afraid that I mastered it. Because if a woman could do what they did, with fewer chances, fewer allies, fewer names to inherit, then the system wasn't holy. It was just habit, and habits can break. So what was I? A ruler. Not perfect, not pure, not kind, but effective, enduring, unapologetic. I left no dynasty behind, but I left a scar on history's mirror, a line no one could unwrite. They can erase my face from portraits, rename my titles, re-edit my reign into a footnote, but they cannot erase the fact that for one brief, impossible, undeniable moment, China bowed to a woman who did not bow back. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the point.